Evening and welcome. I suppose it's true to say that of all the great Hollywood figures, there can be few more respected by the public than my guest tonight. Over 40 years in more than 70 films, he's presented an image of a strength and integrity that's given him a special place in the history of films. One critic likened his face to a church and described it as a kind of prairie Gothic. At a time when most actors might be thinking of putting their feet up, he's embarked on the most arduous of theatrical events, the one-man show, playing the part of the radical American lawyer Clarence Darrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Henry Fonda. They didn't know you were blonde, Henry, actually. That's the...
You've been asking, huh?
I thought you were great.
I told Mike to ask me that because I'm very self-conscious. I think it's well known that I'm 70 years old and people see me and say, who's he trying to kid with that blonde hair? And I want to explain it. About 4 months ago, I had to do a film that played Admiral Nimitz, who was snow white hair, and I had to have my hair stripped absolutely colorless, white. And what they can't do after they've done that is to dye your hair back to salt and pepper gray, which is I am.
Yes.
And it came out in this burnished gold, and I'm very self-conscious about it.
Do you get sort of offers in streets and things like that?
A lot, yeah.
You mentioned, in fact, you're 70 years old, and that's a time when I suppose most people would think about retiring, putting their feet up. Yet at that time in your life, you've gone on this very arduous thing for an actor, the one-man show. Why?
Because it came along, Mike. Gosh, you just don't miss it. I feel very lucky, you know, at this age. You do start to slow down. Whether you retire or not, there are fewer parts for 7-year-olds. But when a play like Clarence Darrow was sent to you, and it's as exciting as a play and as a man, I fell in love with this man when I read it. You just don't not do it. Mm. And I've been doing it for 2 years now.
That's right. Of course, there's an added complication with you, too, of course, because you were very unwell, weren't you, last year?
In the middle of the New York run last year,
That's right.
I had my little problem that was not a heart attack, but they determined that a pace setter would help me.
What exactly is a pace setter? I mean, I've read about it, but I don't understand how it works.
You were asking the right man, because I didn't know anything about it until they did it to me. Actually, it's no big deal. It's a local anesthetic job. I talked to the doctor all through. It's just an implant right under the skin, under the collarbone, a little thing about the size of a thin package of cigarettes, and there's a catheter from that through an artery into the heart, and a battery in this makes an impulse in the heart that keeps the heart going at a certain rate.
I see, it regulates the beat.
Yeah, everybody has a built-in pace setter, which is part of their heart, a little nodule, and mine was out of whack for some reason or other, and my heart was fibrillating, and so this keeps my heart going at 70 per. If I exert myself, my own heart takes over. This is just on demand.
I see.
I recharge it every week. It's a permanent thing. I don't have another one put in when the battery runs down.
You just plug yourself into something.
It's like that almost. Yeah.
It's like the $6 million man, isn't it? Extraordinary. But I mean, I would have imagined that being the case, that I think if I had been in your shoes, I would have thought about retiring. I mean, do you need to work financially?
No.
You don't?
No, it's a joy, Mike. It's as long as it remains a joy, why not?
Yes.
I wouldn't think of not doing it.
When did you first think of doing it? I mean, how long ago was that, of working?
50 years ago. And I didn't think about doing it. Somebody else thought about it, and I got pushed. It never occurred to me to be an actor. I didn't have any background in my life, in my family, or in any way. I did not grow up going to movies and thinking I want to be a movie actor. I didn't know. I went to the movies, but it never occurred to me. I was out of college. I studied journalism at college. Thought I was going to be a writer. My grandfather, I think, sort of encouraged that. Anyway, I'm home from college, and a very good friend of our family's named Dorothy Brando, who later had a son named Marlon.
I've heard of him, yeah.
Was very active in the board of directors of the Little Theater, the Omaha Community Playhouse, an amateur group. And they were evidently hard up for juvenile. They'd cast somebody, and he decided he didn't want to do it, or left town or something, and they're suddenly stuck without a juvenile. And it wasn't that Doe thought that I had talent. I just was the right age. So she literally pushed me, and I was too shy to say, don't do this to me. And that's how it happened. And after it happened, I don't remember the experience of playing that part. What I remember are physical things like being on stage before the curtain goes up and hearing the buzz of the audience behind the curtain. And then when the stage manager gives the cue for the house lights to start to go down, that buzz starts to get quiet. I remember those physical things. And then when the curtain did go up, the lights that would hit you from the footlights and from out front that weren't on until the curtain was up. I don't remember playing the part at all. And for the rest of the year, I didn't act, because it wasn't acting yet to me. It was just this theater, when you looked up and there was a grid up there where scenery was hanging, and there was a big electrical switchboard. And I pulled the curtain and I swept the stage and I built scenery and painted it and I ushered and I did everything else. And the second season, in the meantime, my family didn't object in any way. I wasn't doing anything very productive. And the season lasted from September till May, I believe, the Playhouse season. They did a play about every month. Finally, the season is over and I'm home, in the sense that I hadn't hardly been home. I'd almost lived at the Playhouse. And I don't want to make too long a story, but my dad finally said, I think it's time, you're out of college. What are we going to do? And I didn't know. I wasn't prepared for anything. I answered an ad in a paper, and I got a job as a file clerk in a retail credit company. It was a very complicated system of filing, but I got the job. I got it in June, and the following September, the director came back for the Playhouse second season and called me and said, we're going to open with Merton of the movies, and I want you to play Merton. I didn't know what this was, but I said, fine, because I'd had so much fun before. My dad said, no way. You've got a very important job, important in the sense that there is a chance for advancement. You can't do justice to both. And I was determined I was going to do it, not because I had an ambition to be an actor, just because I'd had so much fun the year before and he wanted me to. So I had the only argument I'd ever had with my father. My mother was the diplomat and the pace setter, and I didn't have to leave home, which I'd threatened to do because I was 21 now. I stayed home, but my father didn't speak to me for the month. Well, he didn't get much chance to because I wasn't home enough. I got up at 7 in the morning to go to the work at the office. I left the office and I have a malted milk and a sandwich at a drugstore on my way to the theater, the little Playhouse, where we rehearsed only evenings because it's amateur. Everybody's got a job of some sort, so they only rehearsed at night. And by the time I got home, my dad was in bed, so I didn't see him very much. But when we did see each other, we didn't speak. It was a situation. Opening night, the family came, of course. Do you know Merton of the movies? I've
heard of it, but I've never...
It's a play, a comedy about a boy that works in a grocery store that dreams about being a movie actor. That's enough to explain it. The family came, 2 sisters, my mother and my father, and my sister came back afterwards to the dressing room. She said, we won't all come back, we'll wait at home for you, because it's sort of pandemonium backstage, because it's a big social thing, too. So eventually I got my makeup off, and I've left, and I'm home. Now, my father's sitting in Father's chair, back of the paper, and my mother and my sisters are over here in a group. And he doesn't speak to me, so I pass him, and I join my sisters and my mother, and they just went on, extravagant praise, and just everything, oh, marvelous, for, like 10 minutes. And then my sister started to say something that sounded like it was going to be less than an extravagant. She said, there was one point I thought, if only. I think she got about that far, and Dad says, shut up, he was perfect. I'll never forget it because I've always felt so lucky that I was brought up by the parents that I did have, and my dad was so special. And he saw something that night, as far as he was concerned, anything I wanted to do. And 3 years later, when I learned you got paid for this in New York, and I decided to go to New York, no quarrel at all.
And he'd seen something in you that you really didn't know that existed yourself.
Whatever.
Yeah.
And the end of the story about the retail credit company, because when I went into the retail credit company, I kept that job to tell him I was going to quit and go to New York. the manager was stricken, absolutely stricken. He said, "But Fonda, I was going to send you to the home office in Atlanta." Just think, if I hadn't gone to New York, I might be the branch manager of the retail credit company today.
Let's have a look at you in those very early days, because you went to Hollywood. In fact, you were a star in your first movie, weren't you? Which was The Farmer Takes a Wife, which you'd already done on stage.
I did that play in New York, and Fox bought it to make a film with Janet Gaynor.
That's right. But one of the most crucial films to you in those very early days was The Young Mr. Lincoln, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
And John Ford directed. It started, of course, a long relationship that you had with Ford.
I did 8 with him.
8 films. Yeah. Well, let's have a look then. We've got a clip here of young Mr. Lincoln, and in fact, it is, when he's very young, preventing a lynch mob from breaking into the jail.
Trouble is, when men start taking the law into their own hands, they're just zapped in all the confusion and fun to start hanging somebody who's not a murderer, somebody who is. And the next thing you know, they're hanging one another just for fun. Till it gets to a place a man can't pass a tree or look at a rope without feeling uneasy. We seem to lose our heads in times like this. We do things together that we'd be mighty ashamed to do by ourselves. For instance, you take Jeremiah Carter yonder. There's not a finer, more decent, God-fearing man in Springfield than Jeremiah Carter. And I wouldn't be surprised if when he goes home, he takes down a certain book and looks into it. Maybe you just happen to hit on these words. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Why don't you put it down for a spell, boys? Ain't it getting heavy? That's all I've got to say, friends. Good night.
You fought against that part, didn't you, when it was first suggested you do it?
I don't think of it was fighting. I just, when it was first suggested to me, I just said, you're crazy, you know, I can't play Lincoln. That's like playing God to me. And they finally persuaded me to do a film test. I wasn't under contract at the time to Zanuck, and I could pick and choose. I agreed to do the film test, and I remember I was in the makeup chair for 3 hours to put the nose on the wart and fix my hair and everything. And we tested on a sound stage a little scene with a girl, I don't remember who she was. And the next day I came to the studio with the producer and the writer to see the test. And a little projection room, I remember on the screen, suddenly comes this figure, and I thought, my God, it does look like Lincoln. And then my voice came out, and I absolutely dissolved, and it just destroyed me. I said, no way. I couldn't do it. About 3 months later, they assigned the picture to John Ford. He'd been away. And he sent for me. He'd evidently seen the test. And I had known his work, and I was a fan of his films, but I'd never met him. He was a legend even then, and quite a legend. And I'll never forget going to his office when he sent for me, and it was like the white hat sailor going into the admiral, because that's the way I felt, hat in hand practically. And the old man, we always called him the old man, or Pappy, was sitting back of his desk with a slouch hat sort of down like this, and either sucking on the pipe or the handkerchief, you know. And he just sat there and let me stew for a few minutes, and finally he looked up and said, "What's all this about you wanting up?" He used a lot of language that I can't use on family television. You think it's the great emancipator, huh? He's a young jackleg lawyer from Springfield, for Christ's sake. Anyway, he shamed me into it. And it's perfectly true that I was thinking about the great emancipator.
Yeah.
And this was the young man in his first law case. And I agreed to do it, and we were in production within a couple of weeks, it seems to me.
And that scene that we saw, actually,
Yeah.
the lynching thing, had a particular relevance to you because, in fact, you actually witnessed the lynching, didn't you?
I did, as a matter of fact. I was 11, 12 years old, I guess, in Omaha, and my father's printing business was on the second floor of a building that overlooked the courthouse square in Omaha. And he came home one night and told about this lynch mob that had started to form during the afternoon. And after supper, he put me in the car with him. We drove back downtown, and it was very unusual for me, for my dad to be taking me at my age and turning lights on and unlocking doors and going up the stairs, which is unusual. You know, it's not like doing it in the daytime. And I remember those physical things and walking across this empty office to the window, a window that overlooked the courthouse square, and this was where the riot was happening. My father never talked about it. He never preached about it. We both just were observers. And I watched an out-of-control mob of several hundred men drag a young black boy out of the jail in the courthouse, overpowered the sheriff to get him out, strung him up on a lamppost, riddled him with bullets, dragged him around back of a car, something like that. The mayor, this is how long we did have automobiles, but the mayor, for some reason or other, was on horseback, evidently because he could get into the courthouse square away from the streets easier. He was on horseback trying to stop this. They damn near lynched the mayor. That's how out of control these bastards can get. That's, well, as Lincoln says in that scene, and he points to somebody. He's a God-fearing man, and what is he doing here? And I'm sure when he gets home, he's going to take down the good book. Mm. And it was a traumatic experience for me. I'll never forget it.
Must have had a profound effect on you. Why did your father do that?
Well, he never told me, but I would like to think that he realized that it would be a lesson. I had to grow up and move away from Omaha to appreciate that my father was a liberal Democrat in a hotbed of Republican reactionaries. That's Omaha and Nebraska still is. Mm-hmm. And that's another reason that I feel, you're lucky to have the parents. Clarence Darrow says it in his play, he was brought up right. Oscar Hammerstein, you have to be taught to hate. Mm. And you can also be taught you don't have to hate. Mm.
Can we go back to this period when you were in fact, you were freelancing, you were doing something rather remarkable in Hollywood, weren't you? You were managing to avoid the studio system.
I had, yes.
You had, and then you got roped in by Zanuck, didn't you?
Grapes of Wrath came along, and I'd read the book, and I'd been a great fan of Steinbeck's. I'd read everything he'd written, and I thought this is something. When Zanuck bought it, I thought I'd love to play that part. And everybody wanted to play it, all the young actors around. And when he called me, I'd done several films for him, but as a freelance actor. And he'd been after the contract, and I just resisted it. But he held that like bait, and I confess I was a hungry enough fish. I grabbed it, and I took the bait. And I can't say I regret it, because I did get Grapes of Wrath. Who's to know whether it was a threat, whether he would have given me the part anyway. But anyway, Grapes of Wrath did happen to me, and I'll be forever grateful. But I did some forgettable films right after that.
To pay the price. What about when you had to make those forgettable movies? I mean, what was your frame of mind when you were given a script? I mean, you more or less as a contract player had
Well, I was pretty unhappy. I fought Zanuck for, well, Grapes of Wrath was just before the war, and I think I must have done 6 or 8 movies between then and joining up in the Navy. And I fought every one of them. And I'd win sometimes, and I'd get loaned over to Paramount to do Lady Eve, or Warner's to do Male Animal, or RKO to do the one with Lucille Ball, Big Street. And we felt lucky that I had won those 3 fights, but the other 6 or 8 I lost, and I had to do the ones that I like to forget.
I suppose the marvelous thing, though, about the studio system, for all that it was obviously wrong and painful to many actors, it did give you the chance to do something like Grapes of Wrath, and it financed a film for Wells to do or something like that.
Sure.
You know? What about this relationship that you had with Ford? Did you have a special kind of relationship with him?
It's always a special relationship with Ford. I mean, whoever you're asking that question, he was a special man. He was certainly one of our giants, a genius, actually. It's hard to really articulate Ford and what made him the great man that he was. He had an incredible pictorial sense. Cameramen loved to work for him because he made cameramen great. Cameramen used to get the Academy Awards just working for Ford because, you know. But
How did
he didn't work like a lot of other directors. He didn't have communication with actors.
No?
In the sense that a Sidney Lumet, who was an actor himself and knows how to communicate, and many, many directors who do know the right way to use some words that can bring something out of an actor, and actors love that. Ford wasn't that way at all. If an actor wanted to talk about a scene too much and he'd change the subject, if he was too insistent, he'd just take the pages out of the script and says, I didn't like the scene anyway, and throw them away.
How did he choose his the repertory company of players?
Well, a lot of it had to do with card playing. I mean, you had to be able to be a pitch player to be in a Ford film. Pitch is also called Hilo Jack in the game, if you recognize it. It's a card game, a very special card game. It's played in firehouses in America a lot. Firemen play it when they're waiting for the alarm. Will Rogers was a great pitch player. Anyway, Ford loved to play pitch. And I had to learn it when I went into my first film with him, and I became a pitch player. And he would cast, Duke Wayne was a pitch player, Ward Bond. The two men that held the post in that riot scene were Cap and Duke, character actors. They were always in Ford films.
Yeah.
They were great pitch players.
Yeah.
And after your location, and you would have your dinner, then you'd go to the Hogan, if that's where you were in an Indian village, or the tent, or wherever you were staying, and have your pitch game. And he loved silver money. He would bring himself to the location, canvas money bags full of silver dollars, because it was more fun, because it made a noise. If he'd won, you know, everybody had to put their dollars in separately so he could all do all this, and he loved it.
Did you actually enjoy making westerns? Because, like your great mate James Stewart, you in people's minds, you're associated.
I know. I don't mind that. Actually, I've done about 85 films altogether, and I don't think more than 15 of them were westerns. But I do have a reputation of being a Western actor. Westerns, not today, I don't believe, but when they were popular around the world. I mean, Japan loved Westerns, and Australia, and Italy. Anyway. And I've done my share, and I guess I've been lucky that some of those were the good ones. Oxbow Incident, and Darling Clementine, and Jesse James. There were some good ones, and they are remembered. I'm not Western, even with my accent. I'm from the Middle West of the States. But cowboy, forget it. I don't like horses. I don't like riding. They have to pay me a lot of money to get me on a horse. I'm scared to death. It's dangerous. You can get killed.
Killed? A man can get killed?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's so disappointing. I mean, that's really shattered my image. That's terrible. That's like learning there's no Father Christmas. What about all that gun stuff as well? You ever any good at that?
Well, I mean, if you're playing a part where you're supposed to be a fast draw, you've got to learn. It's just like learning a card trick or something. It's manipulation. And in one particular film, and that was the story, I was a fast draw, and I had to teach a young sheriff to be a fast draw. And they assigned to me, I almost remembered his name. He was an Indian. He was the fastest draw in the world. He was a champion. I'll tell you how fast he was, and I saw him do this. He would put a white board about that big, and it was just white, not a target, not a mark on it, just white. And he put it on the wall about 25 feet away, let's say. And he has a gun with bullets in it, in a holster, and he's got a knife also. He throws the knife and draws. The bullet goes in first, and then the knife goes in the hole the bullet goes in. Anyway, he's the one that taught me to be a fast draw. And it's hard. I mean, you got to hit the back of the trigger with that part of your heel of your hand to cock it as you hit it. So it pulls it back to cock it, and you pull it out and it's ready to shoot. You can't pull it out and then cock it and shoot. You're going to get killed fast. Well, you can also tear the hell out of your hand doing that, and I'd bleed a lot. But I did get so that I could do it fast, and they make you look good. I mean, if you mount a horse awkwardly, they just do it again, or do it from a different angle or something. But you have no idea what it would be like, and I'll tell you a funny story and why I don't like to work with horses. I don't even remember the name of the film, but anyway, there's a posse about to be sent out after the bad guy, and we're in the Western Street, half a dozen or more of us, 10 of us, I guess. And finally, okay, we've had this decided, we'll go. Now, across the street are the 10 horses that are all tied up at the rail. And 10 men have to go over and mount the horses and ride off up the street in one shot. The camera just goes like this. It took 2 days. Because those horses hadn't read the script, and they didn't. And you know, and you could, I've almost got to get up. Can I get up?
Please do, yes, indeed.
You know, your horse there, you got to get the bridle away from the rail, and you get the bridle up there, and then get your foot in the stirrup, and then you swing. But if the horse moves himself over that way, and this is what happened to me, I swung up, but he went that way, and I'm up in the air, and I went right straight I mean, a series of things like that can discourage you about working with horses.
You lived, of course, for a while, didn't you, in your bachelor days with the other great cowboy hero, James Stewart.
Does he know you call him a cowboy? Well, I guess he did.
I mean, yes.
We certainly did. We were bachelors in New York in the theater together the last 2 or 3 years that I was in the theater before I was taken out to do Farmer Takes a Wife, and he followed me out about 4 months later, and we took a bachelor quartered house in California, and then Josh Logan joined us and Johnny Swope, and there were always at least 4 of us. For over a year, till I got married, we were all just bachelors.
Is he absent-minded to live with, as he appears to be when you talk to him?
Not at all. Oh, no.
No. No?
No.
Does he tell fibs?
He exaggerates. Actually, I don't want to put that down because he's better than it's better to have Jim tell a story than for me to tell it, because he can elaborate and fantasize, and it becomes a much funnier story. He can tell a story, and I've heard him tell stories that aren't about anything except casting a line fishing. He can tell it for an hour and 45 minutes, and it's true. And you're laughing all the time. And if he tells you the story about how Swope and he and I and Josh decided we were going to tunnel under Garbo's fence because she'd built a fence around her house to make it more private. He dramatizes the story that we went out and dug and started, and we found he had a water main someplace and it sprung a leak. Now, that's not so at all. What it was, the 4 of us sat around drinking and got drunk one night talking about, let's dig a tunnel under the fence. We talked a lot about it and laughed a lot about it, but we never left the house.
But Henry, when I interviewed him, he told me that story, and he actually came up in Garbo's bedroom, I think.
It gets better every time he takes it, sure.
Let's talk a bit now about you and your family, because you're head of this very remarkable and talented family.
I'm not the head, but I...
You're not the head. You're the titular head, I suppose you would be, yeah. Whenever one reads about you, about this family, it seems that there's a rift in it and this sort of thing. Are these reports exaggerated?
Quite. Both Jane and Peter went through what is known as a classic rebellion, when a child decides to go into the father's business, whether he's a banker or in show business. There has to be a kind of rebellion. You don't want to feel that your father made it possible for you, or that you're a success because of your father. So they both went through what is recognized and called classic rebellion. And I like to think that I was smart enough to recognize it for what it was. Also, they both did well almost immediately, so I didn't have to hold my breath too long, and it didn't last very long. But when it did last, there were some provocative things said, and they're the things that are still in the legend. And so if, as Time magazine did a cover story on us only like 3 years ago, and they assigned a reporter to each one of the three of us for like 2 weeks each. And then all of us were together. Jane and Peter and I were together with all of the reporters. Not one word that was taken during those 2 weeks was used in the story. It was all a rehash of the old stuff. And both of them were as unhappy with it as I was. But that's why it lasts, because it's in the files, and it's part of the legend, and it's not so. We couldn't be more friendly, happier together. I couldn't be more proud. I'm proud. I'm in awe.
Really?
I'm in awe of both of them. Jane not only is one of the most incredible actresses I've ever seen, and I have to say that I'm not surprised, because I saw her do things early before she'd committed herself that I thought if she ever does want to, she's going to make it. But when I saw Clute as an example, I couldn't wait to sit and talk to her. And this was not father-daughter. This is actor-actor. Where did it come from? How did that happen to you? What did you know? And we're talking actor talk. And when I realized that the scene that had knocked me out was an improvisation, which I couldn't do if I was paid money to do it. I just can't. I have to have the written word and a director and help me a lot. They got to this scene, and the director knew what he wanted, but it wasn't written. And he talked to Jane about it. He says, just give me a moment. And this came out in an improvisation and just tore you apart. Anyway, she's not only this incredible actress, but she's the activist that you know her to be. And I'm in nothing but sympathy with.
You're proud of that part of her?
Yeah, part of it, only in as much as I'm in sympathy.
Yes.
It's not in me to be an activist, just in my makeup. I'm not, she's extrovert, I'm very introvert. It's impossible, it would be impossible for me to get up, as much as my heart might be full and my head full of a cause, to face an audience in my character to talk about it. I couldn't do that. I'm in awe that she does to 5 people or 5,000 people, and is good at it and feels deeply. Peter, I'm in awe of, for a lot of other reasons too. I've been in films for 40 years, and I have no ambition, even though I produced 12 Angry Men. It was given me as an opportunity. I put it together, and then I became an actor and let Sidney Lumet take over. Peter, do you know the expression hyphenate?
Well, I know what it means.
In the trades
No,
in America, a hyphenate is a producer, director, writer-director.
I see, yes, yes.
I was going to say my son is the original hyphenate, but I realized that Orson Welles was ahead of him. But when Peter was 12 years old in his little boarding school, he wrote, produced, built the scenery, made the wardrobe, played 4 parts, and directed it, you know, the original. And he's doing it now in films. And he is more knowledgeable about films in the few years that he's been involved than I have been in 40 years. He knows not only every different kind of a lens, but why it's used. He knows all the technical things about making films. He also knows how to release them and distribute them, which I'm not only knowledgeable about, but couldn't care less about. But, he's brilliant.
It could, in fact, have gone so wrong, couldn't it? I mean, the classic thing, the famous father.
And it happens so often that that's why it's heartbreak. Particularly if one of the parents is famous, and a child of that parent decides they want to try it, and doesn't make it. That's failure.
Yes.
The hardest thing in the world is to commit yourself and then admit that you're not going to make it and change your mind. It's admitting failure.
If you're called Fonda, of course, it's doubly sad in that situation.
Of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Do you think you'll ever, the family, be able to live down years of rebellion and the legend that grew up around.
Oh, sure. Oh. It only hurts when it's sort of rehashed and somebody decides to do a book called The Fabulous Fondas, and it's unauthorized, so he gets his material out of the morgue, which is what the newspapers call their files. And so again, it's a rehash, and I haven't read the one that's out called The Fabulous Fondas, but Jane did, and she read it in galleys and said, "Don't read it, Dad, it'll just make you mad," so I haven't.
Do you have any plans to work together as a family
As a matter of fact, we
project?
do, and it's Jane's idea. It's about 2.5 years ago. It was at our home, a Christmas gathering, family gathering, and Peter has had an option on a Howard Fast novel about this American Revolution, Valley Forge, actually, for 10 years. He'd never been able to get a script on it. And he was talking about it that day, that Christmas day at the house. And Tom Hayden, Jane's husband, turns out to be also a scholar of the American Revolution and was listening about it. Anyway, that discussion started the idea that there should be a picture about the American Revolution that isn't what you read in the textbooks that you're taught in school. And Jane has single-handedly followed through on it. She got an historian who did the back work, the research. She's gone to a studio. She's got the money from Columbia Studios. It's now in the hands, the material is in the hands of a top writer. They've made a deal with Peter and me and Jane and Sidney Pollack, a director, and if the script is delivered and we all like it, we'll be in business this time next year.
Mm-hmm. That should be a very exciting project. Yeah. What you mentioned earlier, actually, a film that I know is very dear to your heart, that's 12 Angry Men, a film that you produced and got together. Is that, would you say, looking back on your career, the proudest achievement in cinema terms?
I guess so, because I was wearing two hats. So as a producer and as an actor in it, I'm proud. It won awards around the world. There wasn't a country that it played in that didn't give it an award of some kind. It won the top award at the Berlin Festival and Cannes, Venice Festival, all awards. I'm certainly, I guess, and I've been asked the question before, if I was to choose one to put in the time capsule, it would be 12 Angry Men.
It would. Mm-hmm. Why did it particularly appeal to you, Henry?
Well, I don't really know how to say. I mean, I read it, and it was an exciting idea. It was a challenge in many areas. It was a challenge, for one thing, to do a film in one room. Mm. The challenge was to the director, of course, to Sidney Lumet, but it was a challenge. I recognize it as a challenge. It also seemed to me an opportunity, because it was a simple film, to cast the best actors you could get from theater, from films, wherever you could get them, and give them 2 weeks to rehearse, which is very rare. Out of 85 films that I've done, 4 times have I had a chance to rehearse for 2 weeks. In other words, usually you go there in the morning and you start scene 92 and you've rehearsed it and it's in the can, and that's your performance, so it goes to the laboratory. Anyway, to give the best actors you could pick an opportunity to rehearse this simple thing that we could have, after 2 weeks, we could have put it on a stage in a theater and performed it. Yeah. Instead, we went on a sound stage and photographed it. That's one of the challenges. The idea of the story itself, which was Reginald Rose's, appealed to me. The jury system, it's fascinating. The way a jury works, that's backstage for a jury, you know, except the people that have been with jurors on a jury don't know what it's like to have sat during the trial and then be sequestered for hours or weeks to determine guilt or innocence. So that was interesting. I don't know that I could claim any idea about, I don't even know what word to use, whatever award should be given there should be given to Reginald Rose, who wrote it. If he was trying to say something. I wasn't necessarily trying to say something.
You didn't buy it necessarily for the message in it,
no.
Although you sympathize with the...
I did, totally.
With the character you played.
Yeah, totally. But I don't feel at all, never occurred to me that we have a message here.
I suppose that part there defined the kind of screen image that you've become associated with over many, many years in the public mind. I mean, how would you define that image yourself?
I've never tried to. I haven't a clue. No way.
No?
No.
But I mean, does it upset you that people...
Oh, no. Oh, no, no.
No.
I don't... I think I'm given credit for a lot that I don't deserve, because your face has a certain look, or your body, your build, your cast as a sympathetic character, let's say. I mean, it's unusual to be cast against character. That is what I look like. I don't think I'm nearly as nice a person as I seem to be. And I just feel that I'm lucky over the years that I've been given the chance to play some of the parts that I've been chosen to play, given the opportunity. Directors have chosen me, or the producers have. It also worked the other way. I don't know whether this is out of context for you or not, but the Italian, Sergio Leone.
We made a film with him.
Yeah. Asked me to do a film and sent me the script, and I just couldn't believe it. It was so incredibly heavy, the guy they wanted me to play. I mean, for openers, I massacre a family, a happy farm family. Father, son and daughter, and 2 sons and a daughter. Massacre. That's for openers, and he gets worse. And I just turned it down, and he came and flew over to the States to persuade me. And I met him, had lunch with him, and I hadn't seen his early films, so I didn't know Sergio Leone's reputation. And he realized I hadn't seen him, so he arranged for a screening, and I saw about 3.5 hours of his early films with Clint Eastwood. And one of them involved an actor friend of mine, and I called him, and he said, "Don't miss it, just go. To hell with the script, just go. You'll fall in love with him, he's marvelous." So I accepted. And in the months before I went, I kept thinking, now, this heavy son of a bitch, how am I gonna... I finally went to an optometrist and had contact lenses made to make my baby blues brown. And I grew a mustache with a little divot that looked a little bit like the guy that shot Lincoln. I'm trying to look like a son of a bitch. And I arrive at the studio in Rome, and Sergio takes one look at me and says, "Off." Not at all. He was buying the baby blues. He wanted, and I didn't know why until I realized in my opening scene in the film, you don't know it's me yet. You're with a farm family, a farmer and his 17-year-old daughter and an 18-year-old son, and they're preparing some very happy occasion outside the house, a picnic on a table. And the older boy is going to get into the buggy and drive into the village to get somebody to come out. And you just know that it's a happy occasion. In the middle of this happy occasion, there's an off-screen shot, and the girl falls dead. And the father looks down in horror, looks up. There's another shot, and he falls dead. Now the boy comes around in the buggy. He's on his way off, and he sees his father and sister lying there, and he looks up. There's another shot, and he falls. Sorry. Now, the little boy, who's about 9 years old, who's been in the house to get something to come out to this little picnic they've been arranging, he comes out of the house, little 9-year-old, carrying things, and sees his dead father and his dead brother and sister, and looks up, and absolutely horror-stricken, of course. Now you reverse, and you see 5 or 6 long-robed, brimmed hat characters that you don't recognize, but just ominous-looking, converging from the sagebrush with rifles and handguns. And this terrible moment that you just watched a farm family massacred. And they start to walk towards you, converging towards you, and then the camera switches back to the little boy who's standing there just petrified, watching these people come to him. And then into the foreground of the little boy comes a figure. And the camera very slowly, it's me, the camera very slowly is coming around like this. And Sergio Leone had cast me because he could imagine at this moment the audience saying, "Jesus Christ, it's Henry Fonda."
And they did. And they did.
And they did.
All over the world they did. Yeah, right. What parts are there left to play, Henry, for you?
Left to
yes.
play?
Yes. I mean, what's your ambition? What would you
I
like
don't
to-
know that there's any, I'm not looking forward to anything. When Darryl came to me, I didn't know that this would happen to me at this time of my life. It's not usual that to get to be 70 years old to find a part that is as exciting and rewarding as Clarence Darrow in a one-man play particularly. I've done it now for 2 years, off and on, for 10 or 12-week runs at a time. I'll continue doing that whenever I feel like it. Just all they got to do is to book me out on a tour. I've been asked to come to Australia and many places. But I don't expect to ever give up as long as I have my health, and I'm lucky that I do have my health, and I get great joy out of it.
Did you ever think, when you look back, that when you started it would have lasted as long as it has done, your career?
No. Of course, when I went into the theater, it was theater. I got started in the little theater in Omaha, and then learned you got paid for it in New York, and I went to New York. And I didn't get paid very well for a long time, but I became an actor in the theater, and that's all I looked forward to. I didn't think about being a star, just being allowed to act. I would have been perfectly happy, I'm sure, to live the rest of my life as an actor in repertory companies, stock companies, playing all sorts of interesting parts. No acclaim. Stardom never occurred to me. That it did happen to me, of course, is so incredible, and I get such joy out of, particularly theater. I get more personal gratification out of theater than I do films for what I think are obvious reasons. You get a great deal of chance to rehearse, of course, and then when you do start, you begin at the beginning and go to the end, as against saying, yes, I like that script, and being told finally we're going to start tomorrow morning on stage 11 with scenes 44 and 45, and you do those before lunch, and that's your performance, and that goes to the developing room, and that's it, and then you do scene 72, and they're put together in another department, and that's your performance, and you're happy if they liked you, but you never played the part from beginning to end. There are moments, like the scene that you saw from Grapes of Wrath. There are moments in the 80-odd films that I've done that I like to remember, but they're just moments, as against the whole thing. I played Robert for 1,767 performances, something like that, and never was bored with it.
I suppose, though, you can make the consolation of movies that no matter how little at the end you might be satisfied with, it certainly pays the rent, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. Yes. The rent doesn't have to be high, though.
That's true. Well, Henry Fonda, thank you for sitting and talking to me. I've enjoyed it immensely, and with all your future projects with your family and with yourself, I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.